You ever meet someone who looks completely normal on the surface, the kind of person you'd trust with your life, or at least your Netflix password, and then one day you find out they're hiding secrets darker than a midnight walkthrough? A graveyard. Yeah, that's what happened to me. Only, in my case, those secrets weren't just dark, they were deadly. My name's Martin Terrell. I used to think I was just some regular security consultant. You know, the guy who shows up, looks serious in a suit, asks the right questions, and then disappears into the background. But that's not who I really am. And by the time this story ends, you'll see why. Because sometimes, the quietest people are the ones you should be most afraid of. Let me take you back to the day that changed everything. The courtroom was packed. The air thick with tension so heavy it felt like you could cut it with a butter knife. The judge looked sharp, and with eyes like a hawk was about to lay down the hammer on Dominic Vaughan, a man who thought he was untouchable. Dominic wasn't just your average crooked guy. No, he was the puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes, corrupting judges, lawyers, and city officials like he was running some twisted mafia operation. Emma Lucas, the prosecutor, was on fire that day. She wasn't just there to argue a case, she was on a mission to bring down a monster, and the evidence. Oh, it was juicy. Bank accounts that looked more like Swiss cheese full of holes where the money leaked to secret shell companies, recordings where Dominic himself bragged about controlling judges like marionettes, and worst of all, the lives he destroyed just to pad his pockets. Now, Dominic had this slick lawyer, Brett Allison. He looked like the kind of guy who'd be overwhelmed if someone asked him to make instant noodles. Brett was desperately objecting to everything, trying to protect his client. But the truth was hitting harder than a heavyweight champ. The judge offered Dominic a deal. Rat out his cronies, spill everything, and maybe get a break on that 25 years to life sentence he was staring down. Dominic, the confident, cocky kingpin I'd seen in recordings, suddenly sweating like he just ran a marathon in a suit. I was there, watching it all unfold, the calm eye in the storm. Because I knew something Dominic didn't. His empire was collapsing, and it was my hand that pushed the first brick. The jury didn't waste much time. Guilty on all counts. Dominic's world shattered right there in the courtroom. When he was shackled and led away, his eyes locked with mine, hatred, fear, and maybe a little bit of respect, but I showed no reaction. No victory dance, no smug grin. This wasn't about revenge, it was justice. But this was just the start. Dominic was a symptom of a much bigger sickness. Corruption like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are always deeper shadows, bigger players, and I was ready to shine a light on every one of them. Later that day, I got a message from Detective Rutherford. 12 arrests in 48 hours. Judges, lawyers, officials, a whole network of corruption dismantled. And then she dropped a bombshell. My wife, Trisha, was hiring a private investigator to dig into me. She thought I was just a consultant with a neat little life. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. Alright, so after Dominic Vaughan's world started crumbling in that courtroom, you might think the story would slow down, right? Nah. That was just the opening act. Because Dominic wasn't your average crookie, was the head of a whole twisted web of corruption. And tearing down one spider, it meant shaking the entire web. Emma Lucas, the prosecutor, wasn't just doing her job, she was like a bulldog with a bone. She'd built her reputation exposing crooked officials who thought they were untouchable, like they were above the law itself. And Dominic, well, he had a habit of thinking he was untouchable too. Turns out, he wasn't. During the trial, Emma laid out the case like a chess master. She had recordings, actual proof of Dominic's shady dealings. She called him out in front of the court. Mr. Vaughan, she said, these recordings show a conspiracy to manipulate the judicial system for personal gain. Care to explain? Your relationship with Judge Melvin Ross, now Dominic's lawyer, Brett Allison. The poor guy looked like he'd just been thrown into a cage with a lion. He shot back, Your Honor, my client's relationship with Judge Ross is purely professional. Professional? Yeah, right. That's when Emma dropped the mic, well, metaphorically. She played exhibit for 7. The courtroom speakers crackled to life, and there was Dominic's voice, smooth, confident, and dripping with arrogance. Ross will do whatever I tell him to do. The man owes me more than money. I've been covering for his gambling addiction for 3 years. Without me, his wife would find out about Atlantic City, and his career would be finished. Boom. Just like that, the mask came off. The judge, a nonsense federal man in his 60s, named Arthur Austin, looked like he was ready to spit fire. The kind of guy who's seen enough corruption in his life to know the smell when it hits the fan. The courtroom shifted gears. Judge Austin offered Dominic a plea deal, something that could cut his 25 years to life. Sentence down to 5 to 7 years if he cooperated fully. Spill everything. Rat out the rest of the crooked officials. Surrender all his ill-gotten gains, and testify against his co-conspirators. Dominic, who had once mocked Martin and anyone who dared stand against him, was suddenly a man fighting for survival. Sweating under the bright courtroom lights, he whispered frantically with Brett Calcum, calculating the last desperate moves of a sinking ship. After the trial proceedings paused for recess, I stepped outside for some air, trying to clear my head. That's when Detective Katie Rutherford was waiting for me, standing by the courthouse steps with news that only made me more certain. This case was bigger than any of us imagined. Your intelligence was accurate, she said. We've arrested 12 people in the last 48 hours, 3 judges, 5 attorneys, 4 city officials. This corruption network is huge. I nodded, knowing men like Dominic don't act alone. They build systems in visible fortresses protecting their dirty secrets and dirty money, and breaking them down, that takes time and patience. Then Katie dropped the bomb. Your wife's been asking questions about you. She hired a private investigator. I didn't flinch, but I knew the game had just changed. This wasn't a coincidence. Trisha didn't understand what she was messing with. Thought maybe this was just a temporary setback, some complicated negotiation. But I knew better. Meet Wallace Bright. The private investigator she hired was Wallace Brightheight, a former Denver detective who now did private security. He was good at what he did, no doubt. But he wasn't playing in the same league. Should we worry about him? Katie asked. I considered it. Bright was competent enough to be dangerous to civilians, but compared to me, he was outmatched. Keep an eye on him, I said. If he becomes a problem, we'll deal with it. Meanwhile, Emma Lucas kept tearing into Dominic's network like a lioness on a hunt. She presented bank records, showing the flow of money through shell companies, shady property deals, and a pattern of case-fixing that had ruined dozens of innocent lives. The most brutal evidence came from Dominic's own files, hacked by Christian Montoya, our digital ghost. Every bribe, every threat, every manipulation was logged and time-stamped. Dominic thought he was untouchable, but all his dirty secrets were laid bare like a house of cards, ready to fall. Emma's closing argument was a masterclass in justice. This man, she told the jury, used his position as an officer of the court not to uphold the law, but to destroy it for his own gain. He destroyed lives and betrayed the very system we rely on. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on every count. Judge Austin didn't hold back. Mr. Vaughn, you've corrupted a fundamental institution of our democracy. You used your training not to serve justice, but to pervert it for personal gain. This court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison, with no parole possibility for the first 10. As Dominic was shackled and led away, his eyes locked with mine one last time. Hatred and fear, all mixed together. But I didn't flinch. Justice had been served, but this was only the beginning. Dominic Vaughn was just one symptom. The real disease was still out there, waiting. So, just when you think the worst is over, the real game begins. Dominic Vaughn was locked up, but the mess he left behind, oh, it was like a ticking time bomb ready to explode in someone else's lap. Enter Wallace Brightheight, the private eye Trisha Terrell hired. Now, Wallace wasn't your average gumshoe. Sure, he'd spent 20 years with the Denver Police Department, knew how to follow leads, read people, and dig up dirt. But this was a whole other level of chaos. Trisha hired him 3 days after Dominic's arrest, desperate to figure out what the hell had just happened to her carefully crafted life. She paid him 10 grand, that's $10,000, to find out everything she could about Martin Terrell, the man she'd married, or thought she had. At their first meeting, she was raw, angry. Everything he told me was a lie. The business, his background, even his name might be fake. I need leverage, she told Wallace. Wallace took the case because, well, he needed the money, but also because he'd gotten bored chasing down insurance fraud and missing persons. This case smelled like something bigger. Government conspiracies, hidden identities. Just the kind of challenge to light a fire under his sleepy detective instincts. He started simple: property records, business licenses, tax filings. Martin Terrell's paper trail was flawless. 8 years of a registered security consulting company, steady income, all the legal permits in place. If it was a fake identity, it was a damn good one. But then Wallace hit a snag when he checked military records. Martin supposedly served 6 years in the army, earned the rank of sergeant, got an honorable discharge. Sounds legit, right? Except Wallace found gaps in the timeline, medals that didn't match official records. References to units that seemed to exist only on paper. Either Martin was a master fraud, or his real service record was classified so deep, Wallace wasn't supposed to see it, he muttered to himself. This guy's either a total con or a ghost, and guess what? Martin was a ghost. One afternoon, Wallace was photographing documents in Martin's basement office, piecing together whatever he could. When he heard footsteps, someone was coming upstairs, drawing his licensed firearm. Wallace crept toward the stairs. "Mr. Bright," a calm voice called out from the living room. "I'm unarmed, and want to talk." Wallace recognized the voice from the recordings Trisha had played for him. Martin Terrell himself, against every instinct, screaming at him. Wallace climbed the stairs and found Martin sitting calmly in the living room, hands on the table, relaxed posture. Not the man you'd expect to catch an intruder. "You've got 30 seconds, Wallace warned, gun still drawn but steady. Martin smiled faintly. "I'm aware you're investigating me on behalf of your client, my estranged wife. I'd like to offer you some information that might change your perspective." Wallace raised an eyebrow. Martin pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Official letters from agencies Wallace didn't even know existed. Authorization codes that were way above his clearance level. These could be fakes, Wallace said, voice unsure. Or, Martin said quietly, they could be real warnings that you're digging where you shouldn't. When you were in Kandahar, did you ever wonder about those missions that never made it to official reports? The ghost units. Men who appeared and disappeared without explanation. Wallace nodded. "Yeah, I wondered. I was one of those ghosts." Martin leaned in. "For 15 years, I did things that allowed people like you to serve with honor in the official military. When I retired, I tried to live a normal life, but my wife betrayed me. And by doing so, she woke up something that should have stayed buried." The weight of Martin's words hit Wallace like a cold wave. "You're telling me to walk away?" Martin didn't hesitate. "Exactly. This case isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. Your client doesn't understand who she's dealing with, and neither do you." Then Martin stood, walked toward the door, and dropped one last line. "By the way, your client owes you $10,000. Collect it and find another case. This one ends badly for anyone who isn't already dead." After Martin left, Wallace sat alone, staring at the classified documents. His detective instincts screamed to dig deeper, but his survival instincts told him otherwise. He thought about Dominic Vaughan, locked away for 18 years, Judge Ross, who had mysteriously disappeared after the trial, and most of all, Martin Terrell, a man whose quiet life was built on shadows and secrets too dangerous to expose. When Tricia called that night asking for updates, Wallace made a call that probably saved his life. "Mrs. Terrell," he said, "I'm returning your retainer. I'm closing this case. I suggest you accept whatever settlement your husband offers and disappear quietly." Tricia couldn't believe it. "You can't quit. I need those answers. No, Wallace said. Some doors should never be opened. So, Wallace quit. Walked away from a juicy case that had all the makings of a thriller. Government secrets, betrayal, dangerous men. But Trisha Terrell, she wasn't so lucky. Not yet. 2 weeks later, Trisha was a woman with no options left. The house was slipping away, foreclosure notices piling up like bad decisions. Credit cards maxed out. Every legal avenue closed. Slammed shut by forces way beyond her control. Pride had been replaced by desperation. Confidence traded for fear. And slowly, the reality sunk in. She'd completely misjudged the game she was playing. Meeting at the diner one afternoon, she found Martin Terrell where it all started, downtown diner. Cracked vinyl seats, coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the last century. The same place where they'd had their first date 8 years ago. Martin was there, just like always, reading a newspaper, sipping his coffee like he owned the place. He looked up when she slid into the booth opposite him. No anger, no warmth. Just that cold, calculating calm. Trisha, he said, I wondered when you'd find me here. She wasted no time. You've destroyed everything. The house, the accounts, Dominic's career even, that judge. You ruined it all, he corrected her, voice steady. No, I revealed it. There's a difference between destruction and revelation. Dominic chose corruption. Judge Ross chose to take bribes. And you, Trisha, you chose adultery and conspiracy. I only made sure those choices came with consequences. She studied his face, searching for the man she thought she knew. What happened to you, Martin? This isn't who you were. He folded his newspaper deliberately. Or maybe this is exactly who I've always been, you just chose not to see it. I thought you were just a consultant, she whispered. I thought you were convenient, he replied. A steady provider giving you the lifestyle you wanted. Boring enough not to get in the way of your other interests. You never asked about the scars, the nightmares, or why I sometimes disappeared for days. You didn't want to know the real me. Trisha's hands trembled as she reached for her coffee. What do you want from me? Nothing, Martin said flatly. This isn't a negotiation, this is a courtesy. Martin paused, then looked her dead in the eye. There are 3 kinds of people in this world, those who build, those who maintain, and those who destroy. For 15 years, I was paid to destroy terrorists, criminal rings, threats to national security. I was damn good at it. He leaned forward, and she saw the steel behind those eyes. Why dangerous men once feared him. When I married you, I wanted to build a life, but you chose to destroy. Now, you'll learn what happens when someone who's very good at destruction targets you. Martin, please, she begged. No more pleases, he said coldly. No negotiation, no path back. You made your choice when you betrayed me. Now you live with it. He stood, placed money on the table for his coffee, and said, in about an hour, you'll get a call. It's your chance to walk away. Start over, somewhere new. I suggest you take it. What kind of offer? She asked. The kind with no wiggle room, no negotiation. But the only one you'll get. He was already walking to the door when she called after him. What if I refuse? What if I fight? He paused, not turning. Then you'll see exactly how creative I can be when someone threatens my peace. And, Trisha, I've had 8 years to plan every possible contingency. There's no way you win. Sure enough, an hour later, Trisha's phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but icy. Mrs. Terrell, I'm Gwen Arias. I represent parties interested in resolving your situation. She laid out the deal. Relocation to a small Montana town of about 3,000 people. A job as a general store clerk, minimum wage, a tiny studio apartment above the store. Trisha scoffed. That's insane. I can't live like that. Gwen's voice dropped slightly. The alternative. No assets, no income, no prospects. And your husband's former associates blame you for the downfall. They aren't known for forgiveness. Trisha sat in her empty house that night. Denver buzzed on indifferent. She thought of Dominic, behind bars. Judge Ross vanished after The trial, and her husband a man far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. At midnight, Trisha called Gwen's number. "I'll take the offer. Very wise, be ready. A car will pick you up at 6 a.m., one suitcase only." Then the line went dead. Trisha spent her last night packing up the life she'd once thought unbreakable. 6 months later, Martin Terrell sat in a different diner, this one in a city far from Denver. He was reading about the trial of the century on his tablet. Judge Melvin Ross was dead, found alone in a hotel room in Atlantic City, ruled a suicide. The pressure of exposure was apparently too much for him. Dominic Vaughn, serving hard time in a federal prison where his legal tricks meant nothing. The corruption scandal had spread like wildfire, uncovering similar rings in 3 other states. The dominoes had fallen fast. Emma Lucas, the relentless prosecutor, had been promoted to lead a national task force dedicated to rooting out judicial corruption. Detective Katie Rutherford got a quiet commendation for her work, though much of her cooperation with Martin was still top secret. Christian Montoya, the hacker who cracked Dominic's files, he disappeared back into the digital shadows, his identity buried under layers of encryption. A ghost once again. Jake Prince, now running a legitimate security consulting firm in Chicago. His client list was a mystery, but Martin suspected it included some shady characters. Al Roberts, retired comfortably to a beach house in Costa Rica. His financial skills still valuable in quiet, secretive circles. Martin's own life had settled into a new kind of normal. The name Martin Terrell had been quietly retired. His clients were handed off to trusted associates. Now, he worked under a different identity in a different city, doing work that required discretion and professionalism. Then, his encrypted phone buzzed. A new assignment, a trafficking network operating out of Miami. Was he interested? He deleted the message without a reply. He'd returned to his old life, but on his terms. Some missions he accepted, others he refused. He picked cases that matched his own sense of justice, turning down purely mercenary work. It wasn't the peaceful suburban life he'd once dreamed of, but it was honest, something his marriage never had been. One afternoon, a young woman slid into his booth. Veronica Bowers, a federal prosecutor. She'd been briefed on his background and had authority to liaise with him on sensitive matters. Status? Report, she asked. Trisha Terrell has settled into her new life, Martin said. Morrison's General Store, Have, Montana. Studio apartment. No contact with former associates. No violations. And you, any regrets? Martin considered the question seriously. Regrets mean I'd choose differently. I wouldn't. Betrayal demands consequences, or it becomes an acceptable strategy. That's a harsh way to look at marriage. Marriage needs trust. When that trust is broken maliciously, the marriage ends. Everything else is just settling scores. Veronica slid a folder across the table. Surveillance photos from Miami. The trafficking network Martin was asked to investigate. Powerful men moving children through corrupt officials and compromised businesses, untouchable by local law enforcement. Martin studied the photos. The faces were arrogant, confident, thinking their power was unchallengeable time frame. He asked 6 months to build the case. Another 6 to prosecute. He smiled, not the warm smile of a suburban dad, but the predator sizing up his prey. I spent 15 years making impossible things possible. 6 months is plenty to show these people what happens when their victims find a champion. As Veronica left, Martin reflected on his strange life. Tried to leave his violent past behind, only to learn some skills were too valuable to quit. But this time he chose his battles, answered only to his own moral code. No more government puppeteering. His phone rang, a regular number. Caller ID showed Montana. Hello. The voice was hesitant, familiar and Hella Martin. I know I'm not supposed to call, but I had to. Trisha's voice trembled. I'm sorry. Not for getting caught, or losing everything, but for betraying you. You deserved better. I appreciate that, but it doesn't change anything. You made your choice. You live with it. That's justice. I think about what we had sometimes. Wonder if there was a chance. No, some betrayals can't be forgiven. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. I won't call again. Good. The agreement is the only thing standing between you and a lot of unpleasant options. Honor it. Martin hung up and sat quietly, feeling something close to pity, a luxury he couldn't afford. He paid his check, stepped into the afternoon sun, ready for the next fight. Powerful men in Miami were about to learn what happens when they attract the attention of someone who spent 15 years perfecting the art of making problems disappear permanently. Justice Martin learned isn't about forgiveness or redemption, it's about consequences. And Martin Terrell, he never forgot the debts that justice demanded be paid in full. Sometimes betrayal cuts deep, but justice is what makes it real. When trust is broken on purpose, mercy becomes a luxury no one can afford. Every choice carries a price, and sometimes that price is the only way to find peace. True strength, it's owning your story, facing the fallout, and never letting lies win. Because in the end, justice isn't forgiveness, it's making sure the truth always comes out on top.